Everyone passed me over like background noise while my sister Monique got compliments on her fake life. I let it go for years until my grandmother Hattie's 80th birthday. When Grandma asked where I lived now, I simply said, just a little penthouse overlooking Central Park. My sister spit her champagne all over the white tablecloth. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. My arrogant brother-in-law just whistled and said, well, well, well. That was the moment the ground shifted beneath their feet, and I finally stopped being the family doormat. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. My name is Simone, and at 34 years old, I have mastered the art of being invisible. To my family, I am just a failed secretary living in a basement apartment in Queens. They have no idea that I am actually a senior managing partner at one of the top venture capital firms in New York City, or that I specialize in hostile takeovers. But today was not about business. It was about survival. I pulled my dented gray 2012 Honda Civic into the driveway of the sprawling villa my mother had rented for the weekend. I could have arrived in my company-issued Rolls-Royce, or even taken a helicopter, but I needed to maintain the illusion. The rusted bumper of my car scraped against the curb, a sound that made me cringe, but it was part of the uniform. I took a deep breath, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. No makeup, simple hair tied back, and a plain black button-down shirt. I looked exactly like the person they wanted me to be. I walked up the stone path carrying a heavy bag of decorations I had bought with my own money. Before I could even ring the bell, the front door swung open. My mother Vivian stood there. She did not smile. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my drive was. She simply pointed a manicured finger at the trunk of my car. You are late, Simone. The caterers are stuck in traffic, and I need you to move 40 cases of wine to the backyard immediately. I adjusted the bag on my shoulder and tried to speak. Hi, Mom, happy to see you too. She rolled her eyes and looked me up and down with a sneer of disgust. Why are you wearing that depressing black shirt? You look like you are going to a funeral, not your grandmother's 80th birthday party. I specifically told you to dress festive. God forbid you try to look decent for once like your sister. Monique is arriving any minute, and she is bringing a photographer for her blog, so try not to ruin the aesthetic. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I wanted to tell her that this black shirt was a $500 silk blend from Italy, but she would never know quality if it did not have a giant logo plastered on it. I just nodded and walked past her. Go through the side gate, she barked after me. Do not track dirt through the main hallway, I just had the floors polished. I walked around the side of the house, the gravel crunching under my cheap sneakers. My hands were shaking, not from the weight of the bags, but from the familiar sting of her rejection. I manage portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I make decisions that bankrupt corrupt CEOs before lunch. Yet here I was being ordered around like a servant in a house I could buy with cash 3 times over. I set the bags down on the patio and looked at the empty tables. They expected me to set everything up alone, just like always. But this time I had a secret weapon tucked in my pocket and a plan that was about to change everything. Just as I finished smoothing out the wrinkles on the last white tablecloth, the gravel driveway crunched under the tires of a vehicle that cost more than my mother's entire life savings. A bright cherry-red Porsche Panamera pulled up to the front entrance with the engine revving unnecessarily loud. I paused, knowing exactly what was coming next. To anyone else, it looked like the arrival of a power couple. To me, it looked like a weekend rental with the barcode sticker still barely visible on the rear passenger window. My mother Vivian did not seem to notice or care about the rental sticker. Her face lit up with a joy I had not seen in years. She practically sprinted past me, knocking into my shoulder without an apology, screaming, "They are here! Finally, the guests of honor are here!" The entire family poured out of the front door like a fan club chasing a celebrity. My Uncle Charles, my Aunt Sarah, and even the cousins who had ignored me earlier rushed to surround the car. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped Brad, my brother-in-law. He adjusted his suit jacket, which was a size too small, and flashed a blinding white smile that looked practiced in a mirror. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door for my sister Monique. She emerged like she was stepping onto a red carpet at the Met Gala. She wore a shimmering gold dress that caught the afternoon sun and oversized sunglasses that covered half her face, even though it was partly cloudy. "Oh, my beautiful baby girl. You look like a movie star," my mother gushed, pulling Monique into a suffocating hug. Monique laughed a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves and held out her arm to display a large tote bag emblazoned with a famous French designer logo. "Be careful, Mom, do not crush the bag," she said playfully, but with a hint of seriousness. "It is the new collection." I stood back by the catering table, wiping my hands on a rag, and squinted at the bag. From 10 feet away, it looked impressive. But I own the real version of that bag in 3 different colors. I knew immediately that the stitching on the handle was slightly uneven and the gold hardware was too brassy. It was a high-quality fake, probably purchased from a back alley in Chinatown, but to my family it was proof of her immense success. Brad, not wanting to be outdone, rolled up his sleeve to check the time on a bulky silver watch. "We are so sorry we are late, everyone," he announced loudly, making sure his wrist caught the light. "Time got away from us. I just closed a massive deal this morning and had to stop by the dealership. You know how it is." My Uncle Charles whistled in admiration. "Is that a Rolex, Brad?" Brad smirked and tapped the glass face. "You know it, Charles. Only the best for this family." I stifled a laugh. I knew for a fact that specific model had a 3-year waiting list and cost $40,000. Brad was a mid-level sales manager. Unless he had robbed a bank, that watch was either fake or financed on a credit card with an interest rate higher than his ego. They finally began to move toward the house, a loud laughing mass of admiration and envy. As the crowd parted, they finally came face to face with me. I stood there holding a tray of appetizers, waiting for a hello or even a nod of acknowledgement. Monique stopped for a split second. Her eyes slid over me like I was a piece of furniture. She did not say hi. She did not ask how I was. She simply turned to Brad and said, "Babe, make sure you get a drink, I am parched." They walked right past me, the wake of their expensive perfume and cologne hitting me in the face. To them, I was not a sister or a sister-in-law. I was just part of the scenery, a background character in the movie of their delusion. I tightened my grip on the tray. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts, Monique," I thought, "because the bill for this performance is coming due a lot sooner than you think." I retreated to the sanctuary of the kitchen, hoping to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the living room. The air here was thick with the scent of roast chicken and rosemary, but at least it was quiet. I focused on arranging deviled eggs onto a silver platter, finding peace in the repetitive motion. That peace lasted exactly 3 minutes before the swinging door burst open. It was Brad. He walked in, loosening his tie as if he had just completed a marathon of important business meetings instead of a 30-minute car ride. He bypassed the refrigerator and went straight for the filtered water pitcher on the counter, leaning against the granite island right next to where I was working. He took a long, dramatic gulp of water before turning his attention to me. His eyes glazed over my face and landed on the tray in my hands. "Well, look who is hard at work," he said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. He reached out and plucked a deviled egg from the tray I had just perfected, popping it into his mouth without asking. He chewed loudly while inspecting the kitchen. "You know, Simone, seeing you here in the kitchen really takes me back. It suits you. Domestic work, I mean. It is honest work." I kept my eyes on the platter, trying to keep my hands steady. "Hello, Brad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I am just helping Grandma get things ready." He chuckled, a low sound that vibrated with condescension. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, and clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it slightly, a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt more like he was checking the quality of livestock. "Listen, I was talking to Monique on the drive over. We are really worried about you. I know you are still doing that little data entry thing at that temp agency. What is it, $12 an hour?" That barely covers a Metro card in this city. I stiffened, but did not pull away. Actually, I work in finance now, I said quietly. Brad laughed out loud, slapping the counter. Finance? Oh, Simone, data entry for a bank is not working in finance. But look, I am a generous guy. My company Alpha Tech is expanding rapidly. We are moving into a huge new office downtown, and we are looking to build out our facilities team. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if he were offering me a secret deal. We need sanitation engineers, janitorial staff. But it is high-end corporate cleaning. The pay is probably double what you are making now, and it comes with dental. You could finally afford to fix that chip in your front tooth. I instinctively ran my tongue over my teeth. There was no chip. He was just trying to make me feel small. I looked up at him, meeting his gaze. Alpha Tech. I repeated, testing the name on my tongue. I knew that name. I knew it very well because I had spent the last week analyzing their disastrous balance sheet. Yeah, Alpha Tech, he said, puffing out his chest. We are the next big unicorn. I could put in a good word for you with the hiring manager. Tell him you are family. It is not glamorous work scrubbing floors, but hey, someone has to do it right. And let us be honest, Simone, you are not exactly management material. You are more of a behind-the-scenes worker bee. I gently lifted his hand off my shoulder and took a step back. The urge to tell him that I could buy his entire company with my quarterly bonus was overwhelming, but the timing had to be perfect. I forced a small, tight smile onto my face. That is very thoughtful of you, Brad, but I think I will stick with what I am doing. I am surprisingly happy with my current position. He shrugged, grabbing another egg. Suit yourself. Just trying to help the less fortunate. Do not come crying to me when the rent is due. He turned and strutted back toward the party, leaving me alone with the deviled eggs and the knowledge that tomorrow morning Brad was going to wish he had never walked into this kitchen. The house soon filled with the buzz of 50 guests, all dressed in their Sunday best. My mother had gone all out hiring a jazz trio that played soft music in the corner of the patio. The backyard was transformed into a vision of white linen and gold centerpieces. It looked like a page out of a bridal magazine, but I knew my mother had maxed out 2 credit cards to pay for the florist. I stood by the sliding glass doors holding a pitcher of iced tea, waiting for instructions. Monique was already holding court at the head table, laughing loudly at a joke my uncle made while Brad kept refilling everyone's glasses with the wine I had hauled in earlier. As dinner was about to be served, my mother clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. All right, everyone, please find your seats. We have assigned seating, so please check the place cards. The guests shuffled around, oohing and aahing over the arrangements. There was one long rectangular table set up under the pergola, shaded from the sun, and decorated with fresh orchids. It seated 20 people, including all the aunts, uncles, and important cousins. I watched as even my teenage nephew got a seat next to the birthday girl, Grandma Hattie. I scanned the main table looking for my name. It was not there. I looked at the smaller tables scattered on the grass. Not there either. My mother bustled over to me, a fake smile plastered on her face as she noticed me searching. Oh, Simone, sweetie, I did not forget you. She pointed a manicured finger toward a small folding card table set up near the back door, right next to the path leading to the outdoor portable toilets and the garbage cans. I put you over there, she said loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. It is just more practical. Since you are not really dressed for the pictures, and we need someone close to the kitchen to run back and forth for refills, it makes sense for you to sit there. Plus, you know how tight space is at the main table. We did not want to squeeze you in and make everyone uncomfortable. I looked at the wobbly table. It did not even have a tablecloth, just a paper napkin and plastic cutlery. It was the kids' table minus the kids. Essentially, it was the servants' quarters. A few of my cousins snickered behind their hands. Monique did not even look up from her phone. Okay, Mom, I said, my voice steady. Whatever works best for the party. I walked over to my exile, taking my seat on the cold metal folding chair. The smell of the nearby trash cans was faint but noticeable. From my vantage point, I could see the entire party like a spectator watching a play. They feasted on catered salmon and ribeye steak while I poured myself a glass of water. But while they were busy gossiping about who got fat and who got fired, I pulled out my phone. I was not checking social media. I opened my secure trading app. The Tokyo Stock Exchange had just opened, and the volatility in the Asian tech sector was creating a massive opportunity. While my family ate dinner on credit, I executed 3 short sells on a failing semiconductor company. In the time it took my mother to give a toast about family unity, I had made $12,000. I took a sip of my water and watched them. They thought they were the kings and queens of this castle, but they did not realize the bank owned the throne, and I was about to buy the bank. The dinner plates were cleared away, and the moment my mother had been waiting for finally arrived. It was time for the presentation of gifts. Naturally, Monique insisted on going first. She stood up, clinking her fork against her champagne flute, until the entire garden fell silent. She smoothed out her dress and walked over to Grandma Hattie, holding a large gold envelope that looked like it cost more than my car. "Grandma Hattie, you have spent your whole life taking care of us," she announced, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Now it is time for us to take care of you." She handed over the envelope with a flourish. Grandma opened it and pulled out a glossy printed voucher. It was a certificate for a 7-day all-inclusive cruise to the Bahamas. The family erupted in applause. My Aunt Sarah wiped a tear from her eye. "Oh, Monique, you are so generous," she cried. Monique beamed, soaking up the adoration. "I just want the best for my Nana," she said, blowing a kiss. From my seat at the outcast table, I squinted at the voucher. I recognized the font. It was a promotional flyer from a travel agency, not a paid ticket. The fine print at the bottom clearly stated that a deposit was required to activate the booking. Monique had essentially gifted Grandma a bill, but no one else looked closely enough to notice. Then the room turned to me. My mother sighed loudly, as if my very existence was exhausting. "Simone, did you manage to bring a gift? Or did you just come for the free food?" I stood up and walked toward the head table. The silence was heavy and awkward. I did not have a gold envelope. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, worn leather notebook. The cover was scratched and the edges were fraying. It was a journal that had belonged to my grandfather years ago, one that he used to write his business ideas in. I had spent months tracking it down from his old storage unit and restoring the binding. I placed it gently in Grandma's hands. "Happy birthday, Grandma!" Brad snorted from across the table. "Seriously, Simone? A used notebook. Did you find that in a dumpster on your way here?" Monique giggled, covering her mouth. "Oh, Simone, that is so quaint. Maybe Grandma can use it to write down her grocery list." The cousins laughed. My mother looked ready to drag me away by my ear. But Grandma Hattie did not laugh. She ran her hands over the cracked leather, her eyes softening. She remembered this book. She opened the cover slowly, expecting to see old blank pages. Instead, her eyes widened. Tucked securely inside the front pocket was a cashier's check. I had written it for $100,000, enough to pay off her mortgage and fund her retirement fully. Grandma froze. She looked at the number, then looked up at me. I saw the shock in her eyes, followed quickly by a spark of understanding. She looked at Monique, flashy, worthless piece of paper, then back at my gift. She quickly closed the book before anyone else could see the check and clutched it to her chest. "Thank you, Simone," she said, her voice thick with genuine emotion. "This is the most precious thing I have ever received." She winked at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. My mother rolled her eyes, thinking Grandma was just being polite to the failure of the family. "Let us move on to the cake," she announced, clapping her hands. But as I walked back to my lonely table, I knew the game had changed. Grandma knew. And that was the first crack in their perfect little world. By the time the sun began to set behind the manicured hedges, the expensive wine had done its job. Brad was no longer just arrogant, he was sloppy. He had loosened his tie and was leaning back in his chair, holding a half-empty glass of Cabernet, like it was a royal scepter. The conversation had inevitably turned to business, which was Brad's favorite subject because it allowed him to use buzzwords he clearly did not understand. He was loudly recounting the details of his upcoming meeting with Horizon Ventures, ensuring everyone within a 3-mile radius knew he was a big shot. "It is all about the Series A round," he declared, slurring his words slightly. "Most people think you need a solid product first, or actual revenue, but that is old-school thinking. In today's market, it is about the narrative. You sell the dream, not the reality. The investors at Horizon are begging to give me $5 million because they buy into my energy." I sat at my folding table, picking at a dry piece of cake, listening to him butcher the fundamental principles of venture capital. I wanted to laugh out loud. Series A funding was absolutely about the product market fit and the metrics. If you walked into a pitch meeting selling just a dream without a viable path to profitability, you would be laughed out of the room. I knew this because I had personally rejected 3 companies last week for that exact reason. In fact, if he actually tried to pitch that nonsense to my partners tomorrow, he would not last 5 minutes. Brad swiveled in his chair and locked eyes with me. He evidently felt the need to educate the charity case of the family. "Simone, pay attention," he called out, pointing his wineglass at me, causing a few drops to spill onto the white linen. "You might learn something that could get you out of that basement apartment." My mother chuckled softly, sipping her coffee. "Listen to him, Simone. Brad knows how the world works." Brad grinned, empowered by the audience. "See the problem with people in your position. Simone is the scarcity mindset. You work for a paycheck. You trade hours for dollars. That is a trap. You will never get ahead like that." He leaned forward, his eyes wide with mock wisdom. "You know what the secret is? Money has to make money. You need leverage. But I guess when you are living paycheck to paycheck, that concept is a little over your head, right?" He looked around the table for approval and got it. My cousins nodded in solemn agreement, as if he were Warren Buffett giving a masterclass. "It is not your fault, really," Brad continued with fake sympathy. "Some people are just born to be workers, and some are born to be visionaries. Like me and Monique. We take risks, we build empires. You file papers, and that is fine. The world needs people to file papers." I gripped the edge of the flimsy plastic table. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. The visionary before me was drowning in debt and wearing a fake watch, while the paper filer he was mocking currently managed a portfolio that outperformed the market for 5 years running. "You are right, Brad," I said, keeping my voice even. "I suppose I just do not have that visionary gene. I just like to make sure the numbers add up." "Exactly!" Brad exclaimed, slamming his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "And that is why you will always be where you are. But hey, do not worry. When Alpha Tech goes public, I will buy you a nicer car, maybe a Honda that is from this decade." The table erupted in laughter again. I just smiled into my glass of water. "Keep talking, Brad," I thought. "Every word you say is just another nail in your professional coffin, and I cannot wait to hammer them in tomorrow morning." I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed to use the restroom, but mostly I just needed a break from Brad pretending to be the Wolf of Wall Street. The guest bathroom was located down a narrow hallway near the back of the house, away from the noise of the party. As I approached the door, I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks. It was not the sound of a happy, successful influencer touching up her makeup. It was the sound of jagged, desperate sobbing. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Through the thin wood, I could hear Monique's voice, muffled but distinct. She was arguing with someone, and she sounded terrified. "Please, you cannot freeze the account," she hissed. "I have a deposit due for the Hamptons trip on Monday. If that card declines, everyone will know." I leaned closer. There was a pause as the person on the other end responded, probably reading her a list of missed payments. "I know I missed the last 3 minimums," Monique cried out, her voice rising in hysteria. "But Brad is closing a deal. We will have the money next week. You have to give me an extension. If you cut off my credit line, I swear I will kill myself." "Kill. Do you hear me? I will ruin your reputation if you ruin mine." I stepped back, my back pressing against the hallway wall. The picture was complete. The fake bag, the rental car, the desperate need for validation. My sister and her husband were not just living paycheck to paycheck, they were living on a mountain of debt that was about to collapse. The golden child was actually drowning, and she was using emotional blackmail to keep her head above water. Before I could walk away, the bathroom door flew open. Monique stepped out, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Her eyes were red, and her mascara was slightly smudged, but the moment she saw me standing there, the transformation was instant. The fear vanished, replaced immediately by a mask of sneering arrogance. She straightened her spine and wiped under her eyes with a quick, aggressive motion. "What are you doing lurking in the hallway, Simone?" she snapped. "Were you spying on me?" "I just came to use the restroom, Monique," I said, calmly, acting as if I had not heard her begging a creditor for mercy. She scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest to hide the slight tremble in her hands. "Yeah, right. You are always hovering around hoping some of our success will rub off on you. Well, let me make one thing clear right now." She took a step toward me, her finger jabbing the air. "Do not even think about asking me for money. I know you saw Brad watch and you think we are made of cash, but my money is tied up in investments, high-level stuff you would not understand. So do not come to me with your sob stories about rent or car repairs." I looked at her, at the panic behind her eyes that she was trying so hard to hide with cruelty. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt pity. She was trapped in a prison of her own making, terrified that the world would find out she was a fraud. "I do not need your money, Monique," I said softly. "I really do not." She let out a harsh laugh, pushing past me back toward the party. "Good, because you are not getting a dime. Now fix your face before you come back out. You look depressing." I watched her go striding back to the applause and the champagne, knowing that inside she was screaming. She thought she had put me in my place, but she had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle I needed to dismantle their lies. I barely had time to process the encounter with Monique before my mother appeared at my elbow. She did not look at me with the disdain she usually reserved for my presence. Instead, she wore a frantic, tight-lipped smile that I recognized immediately. It was the smile she used when she wanted something impossible. "Simone, darling," she cooed, grabbing my arm with a grip that was more iron claw than maternal embrace. "Come with me for a moment. We need to have a little family chat in private." She dragged me away from the party lights and the jazz music, leading me around the corner of the house to the dark, secluded spot near the detached garage. The air here smelled of damp earth and gasoline. She checked over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening, then turned to me, grasping both of my hands in hers. Her palms were sweating. "Listen to me, Simone," she started, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your sister is in a bit of a temporary jam, just a tiny cash flow issue. Nothing serious, of course. She is making millions, but you know how it is with high-level investments. All her capital is tied up in real estate and stocks right now." I stood there impassive, letting her spin her web. "And what does this have to do with me, Mom?" Vivian squeezed my hands tighter. "Well, she has a small payment due, $50,000. It is nothing really, just a formality to keep her accounts active while she waits for a wire transfer to clear. But the banks are being difficult with her because she already has so much outstanding credit for her business expansion." She paused, waiting for me to offer help. When I remained silent, she continued, her tone shifting from sweet to demanding. "So here is the plan. We need you to take out a personal loan, or maybe open a few credit cards, just to cover the $50,000. Monique will pay you back with interest next month, I promise." I stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to take on $50,000 of debt for Monique?" Vivian waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, do not look at me like that. It makes perfect sense. Think about it, Simone. You do not have a husband. You do not have children. You do not own a house or have any assets the bank can seize. If the worst happens and the credit score takes a hit, it does not really matter for you. You live in a rental. You drive a beat-up car. You have nothing to lose. But Monique, she has a reputation. She is a public figure. We cannot let her credit rating drop. It would ruin the family image. The cruelty of her logic was breathtaking. To her, I was not just the black sheep, I was the sacrificial lamb. My financial future was expendable because in her eyes I had no future worth protecting. She was willing to burn my credit to keep Monique warm. "Mom," I said slowly, letting the words hang in the humid air. "You are asking me to commit financial suicide so Monique can maintain her lifestyle." "It is not suicide," she snapped, dropping the act. "It is duty. You have lived off this family your whole life. We fed you, we clothed you. Now you have a chance to finally be useful. Do not be selfish, Simone. Sign the papers on Monday." She did not wait for an answer. She just smoothed her dress, turned on her heel, and walked back toward the music, leaving me standing in the dark, with the realization that my mother did not just favor my sister, she was actively willing to destroy me to save her. I looked my mother dead in the eye. The humidity of the evening felt suffocating, but my mind was crystal clear. For 34 years I had said yes. Yes, I will babysit. Yes, I will tutor Monique. Yes, I will step back so she can shine. But tonight, the word no tasted like freedom. "No, Mom." I said, my voice steady and low. "I will not do it." Vivian blinked, her mouth slightly open, as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. "Excuse me. I do not think I heard you correctly, Simone. I just explained that this is an emergency. Your sister's reputation is at stake." "I heard you perfectly, Mom," I replied, crossing my arms. "And my answer is still no. Monique is 32 years old. If she has overextended herself, that is her problem, not mine. Naming a debt after me does not make it disappear. It just transfers the burden, and I am done carrying burdens that do not belong to me." The transformation in my mother's face was instant and terrifying. The sweet conspiratorial smile vanished, replaced by a snarl of pure venom. She took a step closer, her finger jabbing into my chest. "You selfish little brat!" she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you, after everything I have done for you? I fed you, I clothed you, I put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me, by watching your sister drown when you could easily save her." "She is not drowning, Mom. She is living a lie," I countered calmly. "And you are enabling her." "Do not. You lecture me," Vivian shouted, her volume rising dangerously close to being heard by the party guests. "You are just jealous, aren't you? You have always been jealous of her. You cannot stand that Monique is beautiful and successful and loved by everyone while you are just a bitter, lonely nobody with a dead-end job. You want to see her fail because it makes you feel better about your own pathetic life." Her words were designed to hurt, to target the deepest insecurities of a daughter who just wanted to be loved. But they bounced off me. I knew who I was, I knew what I had built, and I knew that the woman standing in front of me was not protecting a daughter, she was protecting an investment. "Think whatever you want, Mom," I said, stepping back out of her reach. "But I am not signing anything. Not today, not ever." Vivian glared at me, her chest heaving. "Fine, be that way. But do not expect any sympathy from us when you die alone with your cats. You are dead to me, Simone." She smoothed her hair, fixed her smile, and turned back toward the light of the party, leaving me standing in the darkness. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of lightness. She thought she had just cut me off, but in reality, she had just set me free. I emerged from the shadows of the garage and stepped back into the warm amber glow of the string lights. My mother was already at the center of the patio, holding a fresh glass of wine and wearing a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She had moved fast. In the 2 minutes it took me to compose myself, she had already set the stage for my public execution. She waited until I was within earshot of the main table before she raised her voice just enough to carry over the sound of the jazz band. "It really breaks my heart," she sighed dramatically, placing a hand on Monique's shoulder. "Poor Monique is just working herself to the bone. You know how it is when you are building an empire. You have millions in assets, but sometimes the cash flow just does not catch up fast enough. It is the burden of being a business tycoon." Monique looked down at her lap, playing the part of the weary martyr to perfection. "I just try my best, Mom," she whispered loud enough for the table to hear. Vivian shook her head, casting a disappointed glance in my direction. "It is just a shame that not everyone in this family understands that kind of pressure." She took a sip of wine and gestured toward me with the glass. "Take Simone, for example. She has her nice, safe little job. She makes her little hourly wage and she hoards it like a dragon. She has no idea what it takes to take risks. And when her own sister needs a tiny bit of temporary support, she turns her back." The conversation at the table stopped dead, forks lowered to plates. All eyes turned to me. They did not see a sister who had just refused to be financially abused. They saw a stingy, ungrateful woman who refused to help the golden child. My Aunt Sarah shook her head, her pearl earrings trembling. "Oh, Simone, really? Family helps family. That is the rule." Uncle Charles chimed in, wiping steak sauce from his chin. "You know, Simone, money is no good if you do not use it to lift up your people. You should be proud to help Monique. She is the one putting our family name on the map. You are just living in the background." I walked past them, feeling their judgment like a physical weight. My mother had masterfully twisted the narrative. In her version, Monique was not broke, she was just illiquid due to massive success. And I was not prudent, I was selfish. I saw Brad smirk at me from across the table, raising his glass in a mock toast. He knew exactly what was happening. They were shaming me into submission, hoping the social pressure would force me to open my wallet. I reached my exile table near the trash cans and sat down. I did not defend myself. I did not scream that Monique was drowning in credit card debt or that Brad was a fraud. I simply picked up my plastic fork and took a bite of the cold salmon. Let them talk, I thought. Let them paint me as the villain. It will make the moment I buy the canvas they are painting on so much sweeter. I checked my phone one last time. The transfer for the acquisition of the house mortgage had just cleared. They were judging the landlord while eating at her table and they did not even know it. To dispel the awkward tension that had settled over the patio, Brad decided it was time to change the narrative. He knew that the whispers about Monique credit card debt were dangerous, so he did what he always did. He doubled down on a lie. He stood up, refilling his wine glass to the brim, and cleared his throat, demanding the attention of the entire table. "You know, everyone is so focused on the small bumps in the road," he announced, his voice booming with false confidence. "But they fail to see the highway to success that we are speeding down. Monique and I are not worried about petty cash flow because tomorrow morning everything changes." My mother perked up, sensing a lifeline. "What do you mean, Brad? Tell us the good news." Brad grinned, leaning back and unbuttoning his suit jacket. "Well, I was not going to say anything until the ink was dry. But since we are all family here, I might as well share. As well, Alpha Tech is about to secure a massive infusion of capital. I have a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 sharp with the top brass at Horizon Ventures." I froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. Horizon Ventures was not just a random investment firm, it was my firm. It was the company I had built from the ground up, the company where I held the title of senior managing partner. I knew every deal that came through our doors, and I knew every pitch scheduled for the week. Brad continued, unaware that the shark he was trying to swim with was sitting 10 feet away, eating potato salad. "We are talking about a Series A round of $5 million. They read my prospectus and frankly they were blown away. The senior partner personally requested the meeting. Said my vision was exactly what the market needs right now." I slowly lowered my fork to the plate. I did not remember requesting a meeting with a Brad Miller. I pulled up my mental calendar. I did have a pitch meeting scheduled for 9 in the morning, but my assistant had listed it under the company name AT Solutions. It was a low-priority screening meeting usually handled by junior associates, but I had decided to take it personally because the financial discrepancies in their application were so flagrant, I wanted to reject them to their face. I had no idea until this exact second that AT Solutions stood for Alpha Tech. The family erupted in cheers. $5 million, my Uncle Charles shouted, raising his beer. That is the big leagues, son. Monique looked relieved, her earlier panic replaced by smug satisfaction. See, Mom, I told you. We are going to be richer than you can imagine. And to think some people were worried about a little credit card bill. I watched them celebrate a victory that did not exist. Brad was lying through his teeth. No one had told him they were blown away. We had flagged his company for a forensic audit because his projected revenue numbers looked mathematically impossible. He was walking into an interrogation, not a coronation. I took a sip of water to hide the small, dangerous smile playing on my lips. Horizon Ventures is a very prestigious firm, Brad. I said, my voice cutting through the applause. They are known for doing extremely thorough due diligence. Are you sure your books are ready for that level of scrutiny? Brad laughed, waving his hand dismissively. Please, Simone, stick to data entry. The partners at Horizon are big picture thinkers like me. They do not obsess over every little receipt. We are going to bond over vision, not spreadsheets. Tomorrow I walk in there as a supplicant, and I walk out as a multimillionaire. I nodded slowly. You are right, Brad. Tomorrow is going to be a day you never forget. I promise you that. The celebration at the table continued, but the atmosphere had shifted for me. While my family saw a conquering hero in Brad, I saw a man walking blindfolded off a cliff. I watched him basking in the adoration of my mother and cousins, his face flushed with wine and victory. He was so confident, so utterly convinced of his own genius, that he had missed the most obvious red flag in the world. Venture capital firms do not send senior partners to meet with seed-stage startups unless there is a major problem or a major opportunity. And given that I had personally flagged his file for irregularities, I knew exactly which one it was. I decided to give him one last chance to humble himself, one last off-ramp before the crash. I cleared my throat loud enough to cut through the chatter. Brad, I said, keeping my voice low and serious. I know you are excited, but are you absolutely certain that this meeting is a formality? Horizon Ventures is not just a bank. They are ruthless about compliance. If there is even a single decimal point out of place in your projections, they will tear you apart. The table went quiet again. My mother slammed her fork down. Oh, for heaven's sake, Simone, why do you have to be such a wet blanket? Can you not just be happy for him? Brad held up a hand, silencing her. No, let her speak, Vivian. It is cute. He turned to me, a smirk playing on his lips that made me want to evict him right then and there. Simone, I appreciate your concern, really. It is touching that you think you understand how high-level finance works. But you are looking at this through the lens of an employee, a worker drone. You think rules matter. You think compliance matters. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, invading my space. In the big leagues, Simone, it is about the person. It is about the handshake. The partners at Horizon saw my name, they saw my background, and they saw the potential. The numbers are just boring details for the accountants to figure out later. Tomorrow is just a victory lap. We are going to shake hands, drink some expensive scotch, and sign the papers. It is a done deal. I held his gaze, my expression unreadable. So you are saying you have not actually prepared for the due diligence phase? You are just walking in there on a wing and a prayer. Brad laughed, shaking his head as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. There is no prayer involved, Simone. It is pure strategy. But I do not expect you to get it. Honestly, I would be surprised if you even knew where the Horizon building was. It is in the financial district inside one of those glass towers where the security guards make more money than you do. People like you, Simone, you do not even get past the lobby. You certainly do not get invited to the boardroom on the 45th floor. He sat back, satisfied with his insult. So do yourself a favor. Stick to your data entry. Let the adults handle the business. And maybe if you are nice, I will bring you back a souvenir pen from the meeting. I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time because the trap was set, and he had just walked right into the center of it with both feet. You are right, Brad, I said softly. I probably would not fit in at a place like that. I picked up my glass of water and took a sip, hiding the fact that I did not just fit in at the Horizon building. I owned the 45th floor, and tomorrow morning when he walked into my boardroom, he was going to wish he had never learned my name. The catering staff cleared the dinner plates and wheeled out the birthday cake. It was a 3-tiered vanilla sponge masterpiece covered in gold leaf and edible orchids. My mother had clearly instructed the baker to make sure it looked expensive enough for Instagram. Monique immediately positioned herself next to Grandma Hattie, directing the photographer to get the perfect angle. She posed with her hand on Grandma's shoulder, smiling that practiced, terrifying smile, while everyone else sang happy birthday. I stood at the back near my exile table watching the flickering candles. I felt a strange sense of detachment. In the past, moments like this would have made me feel small. I would have felt the sting of being on the periphery of my own family. But tonight, I just felt like a director watching the final act of a tragedy. I knew something they did not. I knew that the foundation of their arrogance was made of sand, and the tide was coming in fast. Grandma Hattie blew out the candles with a surprising amount of lung power for an 80-year-old. The family cheered and clapped. As the smoke drifted up into the night air, Grandma looked around the circle of faces. She ignored my mother, who was already trying to cut the first slice, and locked eyes with me across the patio. "Simone, baby, come closer," she called out. Her voice was strong and commanded instant silence. I walked forward, stepping into the circle of light. "Yes, Grandma." She looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes, the same eyes that had seen the check inside the notebook earlier. "I have been meaning to ask you something all night," she said. "Since you are so busy working all the time, I never really know what is going on with you. Where are you living these days? Are you still in that little basement apartment in Queens? You know, the one where the radiator clanks all night and the ceiling leaks when it rains?" The question hung in the air, heavy and expectant. The entire family turned to look at me. I could see the pity in my Aunt Sarah's eyes. I could see the smug satisfaction on Brad's face. They loved this narrative. The narrative where Simone was struggling. The narrative where Simone was the cautionary tale of what happens when you do not have their kind of ambition. I opened my mouth to answer, but Monique cut me off before I could get a word out. She stepped forward, swirling the remnants of her champagne. "Oh, Grandma, do not embarrass her," she said, letting out a short, cruel laugh. "You know how expensive the city has become. Rents are skyrocketing." Monique turned to look at me, her eyes gleaming with malice. "She is probably living in a shared space with a bunch of college students. You know, bunk beds and chore wheels. Anything to save a few dollars, right, Simone? I bet she is splitting a studio with 3 other people just to afford the Metro card to get to her little temp job." My mother chuckled, shaking her head. "Well, we all make choices. Monique chose success, and Simone chose well, whatever this is." The cousins snickered. The air was thick with their superiority. They thought they were punching down, kicking me while I was already on the ground. They had no idea that I was not on the ground. I was flying 30,000 feet above them, and I was about to drop the payload. I placed my plastic fork down on the flimsy table with a deliberate slowness that drew every eye in the garden. The laughter from Monique's joke about my imaginary bunk beds was still rippling through the air, but it died in my throat as I stood up. I picked up my paper napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth, taking a moment to smooth the front of my black silk shirt. I looked at Monique, whose smirk was faltering slightly under my direct gaze. Then I turned my attention fully to Grandma Hattie. "Actually, Grandma," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet patio without a hint of hesitation. "I moved out of Queens last month. The commute was getting a bit too long." My mother let out a scoff, ready to make another comment about me moving further out to the suburbs to save money. But I did not give her the chance. "I bought a place in the city," I continued, locking eyes with my mother. "It is nothing too extravagant, really. Just a little penthouse overlooking Central Park." The reaction was immediate and absolute. The silence that descended on the backyard was so heavy it felt physical. The ambient noise of the party, The clinking of glasses, the murmurs of conversation, and even the jazz band seemed to vanish into a vacuum. For a solid 10 seconds, the only sound was the chirping of crickets in the hedges and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. My mother's mouth hung open slightly, her glass of wine tilted dangerously to the side. Brad, who had been in the middle of a boastful laugh, froze with his mouth still shaped in a grin that no longer reached his eyes. Monique looked as if I had just spoken in an alien language. Her brain was clearly trying to process the words penthouse and Central Park, coming from the mouth of the sister she had spent a lifetime devaluing. I watched the color drain from Brad's face. Unlike the others, he worked in sales. He knew real estate. He knew that a penthouse on Central Park West did not cost thousands, it cost millions. It cost more than his entire life earnings combined. I saw the gears turning in his head, trying to calculate the math, trying to find the lie. A penthouse! Monique finally stammered, her voice shrill and breaking the silence like a dropped plate. What are you talking about, Simone? Like a sublet? Or are you house-sitting for someone wealthy? I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. No, Monique. I bought it. It is on the 45th floor. The sunset over the reservoir is actually quite similar to the view from here minus the mosquitoes. I did not elaborate. I did not explain how I afforded it. I did not mention the bonuses or the dividends. I just let the statement hang there, a massive, undeniable fact that shattered their reality. I saw Grandma Hattie cover her mouth to hide a grin, her eyes dancing with delight. She knew. She was the only one who realized that the game was over. The rest of them were just standing in the wreckage of their assumptions, wondering when the ceiling had collapsed on their heads. The silence was finally broken not by a gasp of awe, but by the wet, violent sound of Monique choking. She had tried to swallow her champagne at the exact moment I spoke, and the liquid went down the wrong pipe. She coughed violently, spraying a fine mist of expensive vintage sparkling wine all over the pristine white tablecloth and onto the sleeve of Brad's suit jacket. Brad pounded on her back, but his eyes were locked on me. Then he started to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and erupted into a full-blown belly laugh that echoed off the garden walls. He laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes, shaking his head, as if I had just told the funniest joke in the world. "Oh, that is rich, Simone," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "You almost had me there for a second. A penthouse. Central Park. Wow, you really committed to the bit." He straightened up, adjusting his wet jacket, and looked at the rest of the confused family. "Guys, do not you get it? She is not saying she owns the penthouse. She is saying she lives there, as in she is the live-in help." The tension in the room instantly evaporated, replaced by a wave of relief. Of course. That made sense. That fit their worldview. Brad pointed a finger at me, grinning. "That is it, right, Simone? You got a job as a housekeeper or maybe a nanny for some hedge fund guy. And part of the compensation is a room in the servants' quarters. Hey, there is no shame in that. I hear those rich guys tip really well during the holidays. Maybe that is how you afforded the Honda." My mother Vivian let out a long, exasperated sigh, pressing her hand to her chest. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Simone, why do you have to be so dramatic? You nearly gave your sister a heart attack. Why could not you just say you found a new job as a maid, instead of making it sound like you are some kind of real estate mogul?" She stood up and walked over to me, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "Stop lying to try and impress us. It is pathetic. You are making a fool of yourself. Do you think we are stupid? We know exactly how much you make. You can barely afford rent in Queens, let alone a property in Manhattan. Just sit down, shut up, and stop trying to steal Monique thunder." I looked at them, at the desperate way they clung to their version of reality. They could not accept that I was successful, so they rewrote the story to make me a servant. It was easier for them to believe I was scrubbing toilets in a penthouse than owning one. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. "You are right, Mom," I said calmly. "I should have been clearer. It is alive in position. Technically, it was true. I lived there, and I was in a position of power. But I let them have their moment. I let them laugh and roll their eyes and go back to their cake. Because the higher they climbed on their pedestal of arrogance, the harder they would fall when I kicked it out from under them. I looked around the table at the faces of my family. They were smiling again, comfortable in their delusion. My mother had actually picked up her fork and resumed eating her cake, as if the crisis had been averted. To them, the idea of me being a servant was comforting. It restored the natural order of things where Monique was the princess, and I was the peasant. I realized then that no amount of truth would penetrate their wall of denial. They needed me to be a failure to justify their own choices. I shrugged my shoulders, a simple motion that conveyed everything and nothing. You can believe whatever you want, I said quietly. It really makes no difference to me. I picked up my purse from the ground, slinging the strap over my shoulder. I turned to Grandma Hattie and squeezed her hand one last time, letting my fingers linger on the cool leather of the notebook I had given her. Happy birthday, Grandma. Enjoy your evening. I will call you tomorrow. Then I addressed the table at large, keeping my expression blank. I am afraid I have to head back to the city now. I have a very early start tomorrow morning. I have a board meeting at 9:00 sharp and I cannot be late. Brad practically choked on his laughter again. He leaned back in his chair, unbuttoning the top button of his shirt, looking at me with glazed, amused eyes. He swirled the wine in his glass, staring at me like I was a toddler playing dress-up. A meeting, he repeated loud enough for the neighbors to hear. What kind of meeting are we talking about here, Simone? Is it the neighborhood watch? Or maybe the tenants association is meeting to discuss who takes out the recycling bins? Monique giggled, covering her mouth with her napkin. Oh, stop it, Brad. Maybe she is meeting with the other maids to organize a union. You know, demand better cleaning supplies. My mother sighed, waving a hand at me without looking up. Just go, Simone. Do not make a scene. And try not to wake up your employers when you get back to the penthouse. Rich people hate it when the help is noisy. I stood there for one final second, burning the image of their faces into my mind. The smugness, the cruelty, the absolute certainty that they were better than me. I looked directly at Brad. I looked at the wine stain on his jacket and the fake watch on his wrist. It is a very important meeting, actually. I said, my voice cool and even. It is about the future of a company that is currently on the brink of disaster. I think you would find it fascinating. Brad waved me off, his eyes already drifting back to the bottle of wine. Yeah, sure. Go save the world, Simone. Just do not miss your bus. I turned and walked away. My heels clicked on the pavement, a steady rhythm of approaching justice. They thought I was walking away in defeat. They had no idea I was walking toward the button that would detonate their entire world. Goodbye, Brad, I whispered to myself as I reached the side gate. Don't be late tomorrow. I hate waiting. I reached the edge of the patio where the stone path met the driveway and paused. Behind me, the laughter was dying down, replaced by the clinking of silverware as my family returned to their meal. They had dismissed me. I was gone from their minds, relegated back to the status of a nuisance. But I had one final card to play before I disappeared into the night. My phone vibrated against my palm. It was George, my executive assistant. His timing, as always, was impeccable. I accepted the call and deliberately pressed the speakerphone icon. I did not hold the phone up to my ear. I held it in front of me casually, adjusting my purse strap, ensuring the volume was loud enough to carry across the humid evening air. Go ahead, George, I said, my voice projecting clearly toward the table where Brad was pouring another glass of wine. The voice that floated out of the speaker was crisp, professional, and impossible to mistake for a friend playing a prank. It was the voice of a man who managed billion-dollar schedules. Good evening, Ms. Brooks, George said. I just received confirmation from the pilot. The helicopter is fueled and waiting for you at the West 30th Street heliport. We have a slot cleared for immediate takeoff. I saw movement at the dinner table. Brad's hand froze mid-pour. The wine bottle hovered over his glass. Excellent, I replied, keeping my tone bored and efficient. What is the estimated flight time? 35 minutes to East Hampton, George replied. The legal team is already at the estate. The merger documents for the acquisition of Kincaid Industries are ready for your signature. The partners are anxious to close this deal tonight before the Asian markets open. I saw Brad drop the wine bottle. It hit the edge of the table with a loud thud, tipping over and spilling dark red liquid all over the white tablecloth for the second time that night. But he did not move to clean it up. He did not even blink. He was staring at my back, his mouth slightly open. Helicopter, merger, acquisition, Asian markets. These were not words used by data entry clerks. These were not words used by housekeepers. These were the words of the masters of the universe, the people Brad desperately pretended to be, but never actually met. I ignored the sound of the spilled wine. That is fine, George, I said. Tell the pilot I am 5 minutes away, and have the legal team prep the final clause regarding the liquidation of assets. I want to be done by midnight. Understood, Ms. Brooks. See you shortly. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my bag. I did not turn around to see their faces. I did not need to. I could feel the confusion radiating off them like heat. The silence behind me was different now. It was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence of fear. They were trying to reconcile the image of Simone the failure with the woman who just ordered a helicopter to the Hamptons to sign a merger deal. I opened the door to my rusted Honda Civic and slid into the driver's seat. As I turned the key and the engine sputtered to life, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Brad was standing up, leaning over the patio railing, his eyes locked on my car. He looked pale. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. And in a way he had. He had seen the ghost of his own inadequacy coming back to haunt him. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, leaving them in the dust. The first seed of doubt had been planted. By tomorrow morning it would grow into a forest of panic. As my taillights faded into the darkness of the highway, I knew they would follow me. Their egos were too fragile to let the mystery go unsolved. Sure enough, as I merged onto the expressway, I saw the distinctive xenon headlights of the red Porsche Panamera weaving through traffic behind me. Brad and Monique were not going back to the party to finish their cake. They were on a mission to expose what they thought was my greatest lie yet. Inside their rental car, I could imagine the conversation perfectly. Brad was probably gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white, telling Monique that I was clinically insane, that I had hired an actor to call me, and that I was actually driving to a motel or a trailer park. They needed to see me fail. They needed to catch me in the act of being ordinary so they could sleep at night. I kept my speed steady, driving exactly at the limit. I led them out of the suburbs and across the bridge, the skyline of Manhattan, rising up like a wall of diamonds against the night sky. I did not head toward Queens. I did not head toward the gritty industrial parks or the crowded walk-ups. I drove straight into the heart of the beast. I turned onto 57th Street, also known as Billionaire's Row. This was a street where a parking spot cost more than most American homes and where the air itself seemed to smell of old money and power. I watched in the rearview mirror as the Porsche hesitated at the intersection. They were confused. Why would the poor relation be driving her rusted Honda Civic down the most expensive street in the world? I signaled left, approaching the private underground entrance of the Glass Spire, one of the most exclusive residential towers in the Western Hemisphere. The entrance was guarded by a heavy iron gate and a security team that included former Secret Service agents. To the casual observer, it looked like an impenetrable fortress. To me, it was simply home. I rolled down my window as I pulled up to the limestone archway. The guard, a stoic man named Henry, who had seen me at my best and my worst, stepped out of the booth. He did not ask for identification. He did not ask for a delivery code. He saw my face and immediately pressed the button to open the massive steel gates. "Good evening, Ms. Brooks," Henry said, his voice carrying over the street noise. "Welcome home." Brad had pulled the Porsche up to the curb a few car lengths back, his hazard lights blinking. I saw him scramble out of the driver's seat, phone in hand, recording everything. He probably expected the guard to turn me away or direct me to the service loading dock around the back where the cleaning crews entered. Instead, he watched as the gates parted for the dented Honda Civic as if it were a royal carriage. He watched the head of security salute me with genuine respect. I paused for just a second before driving into the brightly lit sanctuary of the garage. I saw Brad lower his phone, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of disbelief. Monique was leaning out the window, staring up at the building that scraped the stratosphere, disappearing into the clouds. They were looking at a building where the monthly maintenance fee was higher than Brad's annual salary. They had followed the rabbit down the hole only to discover the rabbit owned the entire warren. The morning sun bounced off the glass facade of the Horizon Ventures building, creating a blinding tower of light that seemed to pierce the sky. At exactly 8:45, Brad Miller stepped out of his rental car onto the pavement of the financial district. He looked like a man ready to conquer the world, or at least a man desperately trying to convince everyone he could. He was wearing his best navy blue suit, which was slightly too shiny under the morning light, and he had applied enough cologne to suffocate a small elevator. He adjusted his tie, checked his reflection in the building's glass doors, and marched inside with the swagger of a CEO in waiting. The lobby of Horizon Ventures was a cathedral of capitalism. The floors were Italian marble, the ceiling soared 3 stories high, and the air smelled of money and expensive espresso. Men and women in bespoke suits whispered into phones and moved with purpose. Brad walked straight to the main reception desk, ignoring the line of visitors. He leaned against the polished stone counter, tapping his fingers impatiently. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said to the young woman behind the desk, flashing his brightest fake smile. "Brad Miller here for a 9 o'clock with the senior partners. You can ring them up and let them know the talent has arrived." The receptionist did not look up immediately. She finished typing an email, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her monitors. She was dressed in a sharp blazer that probably cost more than Brad's entire outfit. She slowly raised her eyes. They were cool, professional, and utterly unimpressed. "Name?" she asked flatly. Brad blinkered, his smile faltering slightly. "Brad Miller, CEO of Alpha Tech. I have a meeting regarding a Series A capital injection. It is the biggest meeting on your schedule today." The receptionist typed his name into her system with agonizing slowness. She scrolled down, then clicked a mouse button. "Ah, yes. Mr. Miller." She picked up a phone and spoke quietly into the receiver. "He is here." "Yes." "Understood." She hung up and looked back at Brad. "Mr. Miller, your meeting has been pushed back by 15 minutes. The senior managing partner is currently wrapping up an international call. You will have to wait in the holding area." Brad's jaw tightened. "Pushed back." "Listen, honey, I do not think you understand. My time is extremely valuable. I have investors lining up around the block. I cannot just sit around in a lobby." The receptionist's expression did not change. She reached under the desk and produced a plastic badge on a generic orange lanyard. It had the word visitor printed on it in large, bold letters. "Everyone waits, Mr. Miller," she said, sliding the badge across the marble counter. "Please clip this to your lapel where it is clearly visible. Security will escort you to the elevators when we are ready for you. Do not wander past the turnstiles." Brad stared at the orange badge. It was humiliating. It was the kind of badge given to delivery drivers and repairmen, not future tech moguls. He looked around the lobby, hoping no one had heard her dismissive tone. "Fine," he snapped, snatching the badge. "But tell your boss that Brad Miller does not like to be kept waiting." The receptionist gave him a small, tight smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "Oh, I think the boss is very aware of who you are, Mr. Miller. Please take a seat." Brad turned and marched over to the waiting area, clipping the orange badge to his suit with aggressive force. He sat down, checking his watch and tapping his foot nervously. He had no idea that 45 floors above him, the person he was demanding to see was currently watching him on a security monitor, sipping coffee and waiting for the perfect moment to crush him. I was in the middle of a high-stakes briefing with my legal team as we moved down the long corridor of the 45th floor. Three of the most ruthless corporate attorneys in Manhattan flanked me, their leather folios pressed against their chests, as I issued rapid-fire instructions regarding the liquidation clause of the Alpha Tech contract. We were a phalanx of dark suits and ambition, moving with the synchronized rhythm of predators on the hunt. The hallway was lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light, illuminating the abstract art on the walls and the polished marble beneath our feet. As we passed the central elevator bank, the soft chime of a bell announced an arrival. I did not break my stride. I did not turn my head. I kept my eyes focused on the document in my hand, my posture rigid and commanding. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw the brushed steel doors slide open. Brad stepped out into the executive foyer. He looked small against the scale of the architecture. The orange visitor badge on his lapel clashed horribly with his navy suit, and he was sweating slightly despite the climate-controlled air. He was accompanied by a stone-faced security officer who looked like he could snap a baseball bat in half. Brad took a step forward, adjusting his cuffs, trying to summon the arrogance he had displayed at the party. Then he saw us. Or rather, he saw me. I was about 40 feet away, walking away from him. My back was turned, but there are things about a person that are hard to disguise. My height, the way I carry my shoulders, the specific texture of my hair, which I wore in the same style as the night before. Brad stopped dead in his tracks, causing the security guard to almost bump into him. He squinted, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process the visual information. For a fleeting second, the truth tried to push through his wall of denial. He recognized me. I could see it in the way his head tilted to the side. But his brain simply refused to accept the data. It was a cognitive glitch. In Brad world, Simone was a loser, a nobody, a charity case. Therefore, the woman commanding a team of high-priced lawyers could not be Simone. It was a logical impossibility. I heard his voice echo slightly in the quiet hallway. He was muttering to himself, but in his nervousness, his volume control was off. "That is weird," he said, scratching his chin. "That woman looks exactly like my sister-in-law." He paused, watching me turn the corner toward the boardroom. Then he let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Nah, could not be. Must be one of the cleaning staff." He turned to the security guard, a smirk returning to his face. "You guys treat your janitors pretty well here, huh? Letting them wear suits? I guess that is where all the investor money goes. Or maybe she is the lady who waters the plants." The security guard did not even blink. He simply gestured with a gloved hand toward the waiting room. "This way, Mr. Miller. You can have a seat until you are called." Brad shook his head, dismissing the image of me from his mind. He was so confident in his superiority that he rationalized seeing me in a power suit as seeing a janitor in a uniform. He walked toward the holding pen, convinced he was the most powerful person on the floor, completely unaware that the janitor he had just insulted was about to become his executioner. The holding area was uncomfortable, not because of the furniture, which was Italian leather and cost more than a mid-sized sedan, but because of the silence. Brad sat alone, tapping his foot against the carpet, his eyes darting around the room. He checked his reflection in the darkened window of the conference room, smoothing back his hair for the 10th time. He pulled out his index cards, muttering his opening hook under his breath. "Alpha Tech is not just a company, it is a movement. No, that sounds too cheesy. Alpha Tech is the future of integrated logistics. Yes, that is it. Strong, professional." He took a deep breath, adjusting his tie, trying to quell the rising nausea in his stomach. He had bet everything on this meeting. His reputation, his finances, and his ego were all sitting on the table. Finally, the heavy oak door swung open. A young assistant with terrified eyes stepped out. "Mr. Miller?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The partners are ready for you now." Brad stood up, buttoning his jacket. "It is showtime," he whispered to himself. He marched past the assistant and into the boardroom. It was a cavernous space dominated by a 20-foot table made of reclaimed walnut. The view behind it was breathtaking, a panoramic sweep of the Manhattan skyline that made the cars below look like ants. But Brad did not look at the view. He looked at the empty chairs. The room was silent. There was no team of investors waiting with open arms, just a single empty chair at the head of the table. He hesitated, standing awkwardly near the door. "Hello," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. Suddenly, a side door opened. It wasn't the assistant this time. It was a woman. She walked in with a stride that consumed the oxygen in the room. She was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that fit her like a second skin, the fabric shimmering slightly under the recessed lighting. It was the kind of tailoring that screamed $5,000 without a single logo. She carried nothing but a thin tablet. Brad squinted. The woman looked familiar, but the context was wrong. The energy was wrong. This woman radiated power, not subservience. She did not look at him. She walked straight to the head of the table, pulled out the leather executive chair, and sat down. She placed the tablet on the table with a soft click and finally raised her eyes. "Please sit down, Brad," she said, her voice cool and commanding. "We have a lot to discuss." Brad's knees almost gave out. He knew that voice. He knew those eyes. But his brain was screaming in protest. "No, it is impossible. Simone!" He gripped the back of the nearest chair for support. "Simone!" He stammered, a nervous laugh bubbling up in his throat. "What are you doing? Did you sneak in here? You are going to get us both arrested. Get out of that chair before the boss comes in." I did not move. I simply tapped the screen of my tablet, bringing up the logo of Horizon Ventures. "I am the boss, Brad. And right now you are trespassing in my boardroom. Sit down." Brad shot up from his chair as if the leather seat had suddenly turned into a bed of hot coals. His face went from pale to a deep blotchy red in a matter of seconds. He looked at me sitting at the head of the table and then glanced frantically at the door, expecting the real boss to walk in at any moment. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice dropping to a frantic hiss. "Simone, have you lost your mind? What are you doing in here? Get out of that chair immediately. Jesus, if the partners walk in and see the cleaning lady trying to play CEO, you are going to get fired on the spot." I did not move a muscle. I simply watched him panic, my expression completely impassive. Brad took a step toward me, waving his hands as if shooing away a stray dog. "Did you bring the water pitchers? Is that it? Fine, just leave the water and go. I will try to cover for you. I will tell them I was just asking you to dust the table. But you have to leave right now before the senior partner arrives. Do you have a death wish?" He was sweating profusely now, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. I almost felt sorry for him. He was so trapped in his own prejudice that he literally could not see what was right in front of his face. He was trying to save me from a danger that I controlled. I leaned back in the chair and swiveled slightly, just enough to show him I was comfortable. "I am not going anywhere, Brad." Before he could explode again, my executive assistant Elena stepped forward from the shadows near the door. She was a woman who could make a Navy SEAL flinch with a single look. She walked up to the table and placed a heavy stack of files directly in front of me. Then she turned her cold steel gaze onto Brad. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice sharp and cutting like a guillotine blade. "You will sit down immediately." Brad blinked, looking at her in confusion. "Excuse me. I am just trying to get your staff to leave so we can start the meeting." Elena did not blink. "Mr. Miller? You are confused. The woman sitting at the head of this table is not staff. This is Ms. Simone Brooks. She is the senior managing partner of Horizon Ventures, the chairwoman of the investment committee, and the sole individual who holds the authority to approve or deny your funding request. She is the boss you have been waiting for." The air left the room. Brad looked from Elena to me and back to Elena. His brain was trying to process the information, trying to reconcile the sister-in-law he mocked with the titan of industry sitting before him. He looked at my suit. He looked at the way the staff deferred to me. And finally, the horrifying truth crashed down on him. His knees buckled and he collapsed back into his chair, not because he chose to sit, but because his legs simply stopped working. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish on a dock gasping for air, while I simply opened the file in front of me and prepared to dissect him. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Brad sat slumped in the leather executive chair, looking like a man who had just been told he had 24 minutes to live. His skin had gone from a flushed red to a sickly shade of gray. His hands, which had been so confident gripping his wine glass the night before, were now trembling violently on the polished walnut table. He looked at me, and then he looked at the nameplate on the desk that read, Simone Brooks, Senior Managing Partner. I could practically hear the gears in his brain grinding to a halt as the horrific reality settled in. He had spent the last 5 years treating his primary investor like a servant. He had spent the last 12 hours bragging about a meeting with the very woman he had humiliated over deviled eggs. I did not offer him a glass of water. I did not offer him a tissue to wipe the sweat that was now beading on his forehead. I simply reached out and flipped open the thick dossier in front of me. The sound of the heavy paper turning was sharp and loud in the quiet room. I ran my finger down the first page, scanning the numbers I had already memorized. "All right, Brad," I said, my voice calm and professional, devoid of any familial warmth. "Let us proceed. You are here to solicit a Series A injection of $5 million for Alpha Tech. You stated last night that your company is a unicorn and that the numbers are just boring details for the accountants." Brad made a small choking sound. "Simone, please, I had no idea. If I had known it was you, I never would have." I held up a hand, cutting him off instantly. "You are speaking to the chairwoman of the investment committee, Mr. Miller. Address me as such." He clamped his mouth shut, his eyes wide with terror. I tapped the spreadsheet in front of me with a gold fountain pen. "Now I have reviewed your prospectus. You claim to have a revolutionary logistics model. Yet when I look at your profit and loss statements for the last 24 months, I see nothing but red ink. You have posted a net loss for 8 consecutive quarters. Your customer acquisition cost is triple the industry average, and your churn rate is catastrophic." I looked up, locking eyes with him. "So please explain to me why Horizon Ventures should invest a single penny in a failing enterprise. And more importantly, explain to me why a CEO who cannot pay his vendors feels comfortable using company operational funds to purchase a $40,000 Rolex watch listed in your expenses under miscellaneous office supplies." Brad instinctively covered his left wrist with his other hand, trying to hide the watch, but the damage was done. He stammered, trying to find a lie that would work, but his charismatic salesman persona had completely evaporated. He was not a visionary anymore. He was just a fraud caught in the headlights of a semi-truck, and I was behind the wheel, pressing down on the accelerator. I turned the page of the dossier with a snap that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I did not look at Brad. I looked at the numbers that damned him. "Let us look at page 14, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You have listed a projected revenue increase of 300% for Q4, based on a new partnership with a supplier in Ohio. However, my analysts called that supplier this morning. They have not heard of Alpha Tech. In fact, they ceased operations 3 months ago due to bankruptcy." "So, Brad, were you planning to ship your product using a ghost fleet? Or were you just hoping we would sign the check before we checked the references?" Brad opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a man drowning on dry land. I flipped to the next section. "But the revenue fabrication is actually the least of your problems. It is the operating expenses that are truly criminal." I ran my finger down the column of figures. "You have a line item here for external brand consulting, totaling $96,000 over the last fiscal year. That is a significant amount of capital for a company that cannot afford to pay its warehouse rent." I looked up at him. "Who is this consultant, Brad? What services are they rendering that are so vital to your survival?" Brad swallowed hard, tugging at his collar. It is a boutique agency. They handle our social media presence. Image is everything in this market, Simone. You know that." I nodded slowly. "I do know that. Which is why I found it interesting that the tax ID for this boutique agency is registered to a residential address. specifically your home address, and the principal owner of the LLC is one Monique Miller. Brad's face lost the last of its color. I tapped the paper. I have the itemized receipts here attached to the corporate credit card issued to this consultant. Let us see what Alpha Tech is paying for. We have a $3,000 charge at Saks Fifth Avenue listed as uniforms. We have a $5,000 charge for a weekend at the Four Seasons listed as off-site team building. And here is my personal favorite, a $12,000 charge for client acquisition, which appears to be a deposit for a trip to the Maldives. I closed the file and leaned forward, interlacing my fingers. Monique is not a consultant, Brad. She is using your seed capital as her personal piggy bank, and you are authorizing it. In the finance world, we have a word for using investor funds to pay for luxury vacations and designer clothes while lying about business operations. I paused, letting the word hang in the air like a guillotine blade. It is called embezzlement. And since you mailed these fraudulent financial statements to my office across state lines, you have also committed wire fraud. My legal team tells me that carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. Brad let out a whimpering sound, burying his face in his hands. He was no longer the arrogant brother-in-law who mocked my car. He was a criminal who had just realized he had handed the evidence of his crimes directly to the judge, jury, and executioner. I lifted my hand and brought it down on the thick dossier, closing it with a final authoritative slam that reverberated off the glass walls. The sound was like a gavel striking a death sentence. Brad flinched violently in his chair, his eyes darting to the door as if looking for an escape route that no longer existed. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the server cooling systems. I rested my hands on the closed file and looked him dead in the eye. The application for funding is denied, I said, my voice ice cold. Horizon Ventures does not invest in Ponzi schemes. We do not invest in fraud, and we certainly do not invest in CEOs who treat their company accounts like a personal ATM for their spouses. Brad let out a shaky breath, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. Fine. Fine, Simone. You made your point. You are powerful. You won. He pushed his chair back, scraping it against the marble floor. If you are not interested, we will take our business elsewhere. There are plenty of other firms on Wall Street. We do not need your money that badly. He started to stand up, his legs still wobbling. I will just go now. We will keep this in the family, right? No need to involve lawyers. I will fix the accounting errors myself. I did not move. I just watched him try to flee. Sit down, Brad, I commanded. I am not finished. He froze halfway out of his chair. What do you mean? You rejected the pitch. The meeting is over. The meeting regarding the investment is over, I corrected him. But the meeting regarding the governance of Alpha Tech is just beginning. I signaled to Elena, who tapped her tablet. The large screen behind me lit up, displaying a cap table, a pie chart showing the ownership structure of Brad Company. You see, Brad, you made a mistake 3 years ago. When you were desperate for cash to launch your initial prototype, you sold off a bundle of microshares to an anonymous LLC called Nemesis Holdings. You thought it was just some random angel investor throwing away spare change. I pointed to the screen. Nemesis Holdings is me. I own 5% of your company, Brad. It is a small stake, all. Not enough to control the board, but it is enough to give me certain rights. Brad's face crumbled. You have been watching me for 3 years. I have been watching you waste potential for 3 years, I replied. And as a minority shareholder who has reason to believe the CEO is engaged in criminal mismanagement, I am exercising my legal right to demand a full forensic audit of Alpha Tech. Brad's knees gave out, and he collapsed back into the chair. An audit, he whispered. Not just an audit, I continued. A forensic investigation. My team is going to freeze your assets within the hour. We are going to trace every single dollar you spent on Monique bags every cent you wasted on luxury cars, and every fraudulent invoice you generated. And once we have the complete picture, I am going to sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. By the time I am done, you won't just be bankrupt, you will be unhireable. Brad stared at me, tears finally spilling over his eyelids. Simone, please, we are family. We are. You cannot do this. Monique will go to jail. I stood up, smoothing my suit jacket. You should have thought about that before you stole from your investors. And as for family, I suggest you call a good lawyer. Because in this boardroom, you are not my brother-in-law. You are just a liability I am about to liquidate. While Brad was watching his life disintegrate in a high-rise boardroom 45 floors above the city, Monique was busy constructing her own version of reality in the suburbs. She sat in the corner of her living room, which she had converted into a studio. 3 ring lights were positioned to erase the bags under her eyes, and a filter was applied to smooth out her skin. She was holding up the counterfeit designer handbag she had flaunted at the party, beaming into her phone camera for her weekly live stream on manifesting abundance. Hey guys! Welcome back to the channel! She chirped, her voice an octave higher than normal. Today, we are talking about the law of attraction. You have to dress for the life you want, not the life you have. Look at this bag. I visualized it and the universe delivered. You just have to believe you are worthy of luxury. She paused to read the comments, ignoring the ones asking about her credit card debt and focusing only on the heart emojis. Suddenly, the live stream froze. A gray banner dropped down from the top of her screen, blocking her view of her own face. It was not a notification from Instagram, it was a priority alert from her banking app. Urgent notice. Account ending in 4492 has been frozen by court order. Current balance negative. Monique stared at the screen. Her smile twitched. She tapped the banner, trying to swipe it away, thinking it was a spam message or a glitch. But the notification would not move. Then another one appeared. And another. Credit card declined. Assets seized. Pending litigation. The color drained from her face. She forgot she was still live. Her followers watched as the confident influencer began to hyperventilate. She hurriedly tapped the end stream button, cutting off the broadcast without even saying goodbye. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. She opened her banking app. Instead of her usual balance, she saw big red letters that read, "Access denied." "What is going on?" she whispered to the empty room. "This has to be a mistake. Did Brad forget to pay the bill again?" She dialed Brad's number. It rang once, twice. Then he picked up. But instead of his usual smooth greeting, she heard heavy, erratic breathing and the sound of wind rushing past the microphone as if he were standing on a street corner. "Brad!" she screamed into the phone. "What did you do? The bank just texted me. My cards are frozen. I cannot access the checking account. I have a deposit due for the Hamptons in an hour. Fix this right now." There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by a sound that chilled her to the bone. It was a sob, a deep, guttural sound of pure despair. "We cannot fix it, Monique." Brad choked out his voice, sounding thin and broken. "It is over. Everything is over." "What are you talking about?" Monique demanded, pacing around the room. "Stop crying and act like a man. Call the bank. Tell them it is an error." "It is not an error," Brad screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "It is Simone." Monique stopped pacing. "Simone. What does she have to do with this?" "She is the investor," Brad yelled into the phone. "She is the senior partner at Horizon. She owns the firm, Monique. She owns everything. She knows about the fake consulting fees. She knows about the Maldives trip. She has a forensic team tearing apart our life right now." Monique fell onto the couch, the phone slipping slightly from her ear. "That is impossible," she whispered. "Simone is a secretary. She is a shark," Brad cried. "And she just ate us alive. We are dead, Monique. We are going to prison." The line went dead. Monique lowered the phone slowly, looking around her studio. The ring lights were still shining brightly, illuminating a woman who had spent her whole life faking success, only to be destroyed by the sister she had forced to live in the shadows. The living room of my mother's house, which had been the site of a celebratory party less than 24 hours ago, was now a bunker of despair. The remains of the birthday cake still sat on the counter, stale and untouched, a sugary monument to their premature victory. Brad was pacing the length of the rug, his tie undone and hanging loosely around his neck like a noose. Monique was curled up on the beige sofa, clutching a pillow to her chest, her mascara running in dark rivulets down her cheeks. Vivian stood in the center of the room, a glass of brandy in her hand, looking between them with a mixture of confusion and irritation. She simply could not process the information being screamed at her. "Stop it, both of you," Vivian shouted, slamming her glass down on a coaster. "You are making no sense. You expect me to believe that Simone, our Simone, who drives a car held together by duct tape, is the head of a venture capital firm. It is ridiculous. She probably hacked your accounts. It is a prank." "It is not a prank." "Mom," Brad roared, his voice cracking. "I saw her. I sat in her boardroom. She has a corner office with a view of the Empire State Building. She has a team of lawyers who looked like they wanted to eat me for lunch. She owns the company, Mom. She owns the debt. She owns us." Monique lifted her head from the pillow, her eyes swollen. "It is your fault, Brad," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at her husband. "You said you had it under control. You said you were a visionary. You let her humiliate us." "Me." Brad spun around, his face twisting in anger. "You are the one who spent $90,000 on consulting fees to buy purses and shoes. Simone showed me the receipts, Monique. She has everything. She knows you used the corporate card for the Maldives. She is going to send us to jail because you could not stop shopping. I needed to maintain our image," Monique screamed back. "I did it for us." The bickering escalated into a cacophony of accusations, their perfect marriage disintegrating under the weight of the truth. Vivian looked from one to the other, her face pale, finally realizing that the safety net she thought she had woven was actually a spiderweb, and her children were the flies. Suddenly, a beam of intense blue-white light swept across the front window, cutting through the darkness of the living room. It was not the yellow dim light of a street lamp or a standard sedan. It was the powerful, authoritative glare of xenon headlights. The arguing stopped. The room fell silent. "Who is that?" Vivian whispered, clutching her chest. "Is it the police?" Brad walked to the window and peeled back the curtain. His breath hitched in his throat. It was not a police cruiser. Turning into the driveway occupying the spot where my rusted Honda had been parked the night before was a vehicle that commanded silence. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, painted a deep midnight black that seemed to absorb the streetlights. The chrome grille gleamed like the teeth of a predator. They watched paralyzed as the driver's door opened. A uniformed chauffeur stepped out, adjusted his cap, and walked around the back of the vehicle. He opened the rear suicide door with a practiced fluid motion. A leg stepped out, clad in a stiletto heel that cost more than Vivian's mortgage payment. Then I emerged. I stood up, smoothing the lapels of my silk trench coat, and looked up at the window. I knew they were watching. I could feel their fear radiating through the glass. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply started walking toward the front door, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, like the bones of their shattered egos. The executioner had arrived, and she was traveling in style. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the thick tension of the living room. Vivian smoothed her skirt, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. She composed her face, wiping away the panic and replacing it with a mask of welcoming warmth. When she swung the door open, she didn't see the daughter she had disowned the night before. She saw a walking investment portfolio. She saw the bespoke trench coat, the diamond studs catching the porch light, and the chauffeur waiting respectfully by the gleaming Rolls-Royce at the curb. "Simone, darling," Vivian exclaimed, throwing her arms wide, as if welcoming a visiting dignitary. Her voice was unrecognizable from the screeching harpy of yesterday. It was dipped in honey and desperation. Come in out of the night air. You must be exhausted from all your important business. I stepped into the foyer, the heels of my shoes clicking on the hardwood. I did not return the hug. I stood like a statue, letting her arms fall awkwardly to her sides. I looked past her to where Brad and Monique were huddled on the sofa, looking like frightened children waiting for the principal. Vivian closed the door and spun around, clasping her hands together. Her eyes darted over my outfit, calculating the cost of every thread. I knew it, she breathed, shaking her head with feigned admiration. I knew you had it in you. Did you really think I didn't see your potential? She reached out and patted my arm, a gesture so intimate and fake it made my skin crawl. All those years, Simone, when I was hard on you, when I told you that you were nothing compared to Monique, when I made you sleep in the basement, do you think I did that because I was mean? No, sweetheart, it was a strategy. She laughed, a nervous, tinkling sound. I was building your character. I knew you needed resistance to grow. If I had coddled you like I coddled Monique, you never would have fought so hard to become this. She gestured grandly at my expensive attire. I was the wind beneath your wings, Simone. I had to play the villain so you could become the hero. You should be thanking me, really. It was my tough love that made you a CEO. I stared at her, marveling at the sheer acrobatics of her narcissism. She had rewritten history in 10 seconds flat. The abuse wasn't abuse anymore. It was a masterclass in motivation. Vivian didn't wait for a response. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. And now that you have made it, now that my plan has worked so beautifully, we can finally be the family I always envisioned. She pulled me slightly toward the living room. Look at your sister. Look at poor Brad. They are just children, Simone. They tried to fly and they fell. But you are the eagle now. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Monique made a few silly mistakes with the numbers. She is not sharp like us. But you can fix it. You have the power. Just make a call, darling. Unfreeze the accounts. Write off the debt. You have millions. What is 50,000 to you? It is pocket change. Do this for your mother. Prove to me that you are the big person I raised you to be. Help your sister. I looked down at my mother's hand resting on the sleeve of my silk trench coat. It felt heavy, like a shackle I had worn for too long. Her words about tough love and strategy hung in the air, a poisonous mist designed to obscure decades of neglect. She was smiling, that desperate winning smile, the one she used on creditors and neighbors, waiting for me to melt, to open my purse, to be the good little daughter she could use one last time. I did not smile back. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm, as if I were peeling off a leech. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. Vivian's eyes lit up, expecting a checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a folded, slightly yellowed piece of paper. I unfolded it with deliberate precision and held it up to her face. Do you recognize this, Mom? I asked, my voice devoid of the warmth she was desperately trying to manufacture. Vivian squinted at the document. It was a photocopy of a bank transfer record dated 10 years ago. Her brow furrowed as she tried to decipher the numbers. This is the transaction record from the day my university scholarship funds were deposited. I explained, my tone clinical. $20,000. It was supposed to cover my tuition, my books, my dorm. It was my ticket out of this house. Do you remember what you told me that week? You told me the university had made a clerical error. You told me the scholarship was rescinded. You watched me cry in my room for 3 days. You watched me take a night shift at the diner to pay for community college classes. I took a step closer, forcing her to look at the destination account number on the paper. But the money was not rescinded, was it? It was transferred into your personal savings account. And 3 days later, coincidentally, the exact same week, Monique drove home in a brand new convertible for her sweet 16. I looked over at Monique, who was staring at us with her mouth open. She had driven that car for years, never knowing it was fueled by my stolen education. I did not buy Monique a car because I was jealous, Mom. I continued, my voice rising slightly with the weight of the memory. I worked double shifts until my feet bled because you stole from me. You committed fraud against your own daughter to buy a status symbol for your favorite. Vivian's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She stammered, stepping back. It was a loan, Simone. I intended to pay it back. We just got tight that year. You are bringing up ancient history to hurt me. I let the paper flutter to the floor, landing at her feet like a verdict. I am not trying to hurt you, Mom, I said, cold, hard truth ringing in every syllable. I am correcting the record. You were not strict. You were not teaching me resilience. You were a thief. You stole my future because you did not think I was worth investing in. You tried to bury me under your lies and your favoritism. But you made a fatal calculation. You forgot that I am good with numbers. I calculated the interest on what you took from me. And I took my future back. All of it. And now I am calling in the debt. Vivian stared at the yellowed paper on the floor, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She looked ready to argue, ready to spin another tale about how she had only borrowed the scholarship money for the greater good. But I did not give her the chance to speak. I had one final document to present, and this one was not a ghost from the past. It was a sledgehammer for the present. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick blue legal folder. The room went deadly quiet. Even Monique stopped sobbing to watch me. I placed the folder on the coffee table with a heavy thud right next to the empty wine glasses. Let us talk about this house, Mom, I said, looking around the living room at the crown molding and the expensive curtains she loved so much. You always told everyone this was the family estate, the symbol of your success. But that is not entirely true anymore, is it? Vivian turned pale, her eyes darting to the blue folder. I do not know what you are talking about. I think you do, I replied calmly. I think you know exactly what is in that folder. Because last month, when Brad called you in the middle of the night crying about a gambling debt he owed to some very dangerous people in Atlantic City, you panicked. You did not have the cash on hand because Monique had spent it all. So you did the only thing you could think of. You took out a second mortgage on this house, high interest, predatory terms, desperation money. Brad let out a sharp gasp from the sofa. He looked at Vivian, betrayal written all over his face. You told her about the poker debt. She did not have to tell me, Brad, I cut in. Public records tell me everything. But here's the unfortunate part. You missed the very first payment last week. The bank immediately flagged the loan as a distressed asset. They do not like high-risk loans on their books, so they put the debt up for sale this morning. I walked over to the folder and flipped it open, revealing the deed with the fresh transfer stamp. My team monitors real estate transactions in this neighborhood. I continued, my voice steady and relentless. When the notification popped up that the debt on 42 Oak Drive was for sale, I recognized the address immediately. It was sentimental, really. So I bought it. Vivian grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. You bought the loan. So I pay you now. I shook my head slowly, savoring the moment. No, Mom. You do not understand how this specific contract works. The terms stated that in the event of a default, the holder of the note has the right to immediate foreclosure or transfer of deed in lieu of payment. Since you have no money to pay me, the ownership transfers automatically. I stepped closer to her, invading her personal space, just enough to make her flinch. I did not just buy the debt, Mom. I bought the house. You are no longer the owner of this property. You are a squatter. And as of this moment, you are living under my roof. The silence in the room was so profound that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My mother stared at me, her hands trembling where she gripped the edge of the coffee table. She looked around the living room at the velvet curtains and the imported rugs, realizing that the walls she had used to shield herself from the world were no longer hers. You cannot be serious, Simone. Vivian whispered, her voice barely audible. This is my home. I have lived here for 30 years. You cannot just throw your own mother out on the street. I can, I replied calmly, and I am. But because I believe in following proper procedure, I am not throwing you out tonight. I am giving you a grace period. I held up one finger. 1 week. You have exactly 7 days to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. My property manager will be here next Friday at noon to change the locks and conduct a final inspection. Anything left behind will be hauled away. Brad jumped up from the sofa, panic overriding his shame. 7 days. Are you crazy? Our accounts are frozen. We have no cash. We have nowhere to go. You have to give us more time. At least let us stay until the audit is finished. I looked at him with zero sympathy. That sounds like a logistics problem, Brad. And since you are the CEO of a logistics company, I am sure you can figure it out. Maybe you can stay in that penthouse you were joking about earlier. Oh wait, that is mine too. I suggest you try a motel. I hear the ones near the airport offer weekly rates. Monique began to wail again, a high-pitched sound of pure entitlement. You are a monster. You are doing this just to be spiteful. You are going to take our home and probably sell it to some stranger just to make a profit. You do not even need the money. I turned to my sister, my expression softening slightly, but not with kindness, with pity. You are right, Monique. I do not need the money. And I have no intention of selling this house. I would not want to profit from a place built on lies. I looked at Vivian, who was weeping silently. I have already drawn up the transfer paperwork. Effective next Friday, this property will be gifted to the Hattie Brooks Foundation. Vivian's head snapped up. Your grandmother's charity. Exactly, I said. Grandma Hattie has spent 40 years trying to help foster children find stability. She has been operating out of a rented basement while you lived in luxury on stolen money. You always mocked her work. You called it a waste of time. Well, now this house is going to become a group home for at-risk youth. I walked to the door and placed my hand on the knob. This house will finally be used for something good. It will be filled with children who actually appreciate having a roof over their heads. Children who know the value of $1. It is the legacy this family should have had. I opened the door, letting the cool night air rush into the stifling room. 7 days, I repeated. Do not make me call the sheriff. I walked out to the waiting Rolls-Royce, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their lives. I did not look back. The house was already fading in my rearview mirror, a chapter of my life that was finally permanently closed. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing the tomb of their ambitions. For a moment, the silence was absolute, a vacuum left in the wake of the Rolls-Royce engine fading down the street. Then the vacuum was filled with the ugly, jagged sound of panic turning into rage. Brad turned on Monique like a cornered animal. His face was a map of terror, sweat dripping onto his collar, and his hands were shaking not with fear anymore, but with a violent, impotent fury. Are you happy now? He screamed, his voice shredding the air. Are you satisfied? You just had to have the lifestyle, didn't you? You couldn't just live within our means. No, you needed the Maldives. You needed the influencer status. You needed to show off for people who do not even like you. Monique stood up, wiping her tears, her face twisting into a sneer. Do not you dare blame this on me. You are the CEO, Brad. You are the one who said you were a genius. You are the one who cooked the books. I cooked the books to pay for your credit card bills, Brad roared, advancing on her until he was inches from her face. I risked 20 years in federal prison so you could play pretend on Instagram. And what did it get us? Homelessness. We are going to be on the street in 7 days because you could not stop buying shoes. I should have cut you off years ago. I should have listened to the bank when they told me you were a liability. Monique's eyes widened. She did not scream back this time. She swung her hand with all the force of her humiliation. The sound of her palm striking his cheek was sharp and shocking, echoing off the bare walls of the house they no longer owned. Brad stumbled back, holding his face, looking at her with pure hatred. You are pathetic, she hissed, standing over him. I should have married a real man, not a fraud who gets outsmarted by his secretary's sister-in-law. You are nothing, Brad. You are broke, you are going to jail, and you are taking me down with you. I hate you. I wish I had never met you. Vivian watched them from the center of the room. Her two golden children, the investments she had nurtured at the expense of her soul. They were not comforting each other in this time of crisis. They were devouring each other. They were fighting over scraps of a feast that had never existed. She looked at the walls she had prized so highly. The house was gone. The money was gone. But worse, the illusion was gone. She sank to the floor, her knees hitting the expensive Persian rug she would have to leave behind. The strength that had held her up for decades simply evaporated. She did not cry. She just stared blankly at the fighting couple. She had sacrificed her relationship with the only child who actually had talent and integrity to raise two parasites who were now trying to kill the host. She had gambled everything on the wrong horse, and now she was left with nothing but the dust. "Stop," she whispered to the empty air, but they did not hear her. They were too busy tearing the family apart dollar by missing dollar, screaming accusations that solved nothing. Vivian closed her eyes, realizing that the poverty she had feared all her life was not just financial, it was emotional, and she was the poorest woman in the world. I did not tell the driver to move. I stood by the open door of the Rolls-Royce looking back at the house. Inside, the screaming continued a muffled cacophony of accusations that sounded like a distant thunderstorm. I was not waiting for an apology. I knew that was never coming. I was waiting for the only person in that building who deserved a seat in my future. The front door opened again, but this time it was not slammed in anger. It was pushed open with a steady, determined hand. Grandma Hattie stepped onto the porch. She was wearing her Sunday coat and she was pulling a small, battered suitcase behind her. It was the same suitcase she had used to move in 10 years ago when Vivian had grudgingly agreed to let her stay in the guest room. She looked small against the backdrop of the looming house, but her posture was as regal as ever. I walked back up the driveway, my heels silent on the pavement this time. I reached for the handle of her suitcase, but she waved me off with a smile, shifting her grip. "I got it, baby," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I might be 80, but I can still carry my own load, unlike some people in there." She jerked her thumb back toward the door where the sounds of breaking glass had just joined the shouting match. I looked at the suitcase and then at her. "You are packed. How did you know?" Hattie chuckled, eyes twinkling under the porch light. "Simone, I have been watching you since you were in diapers. I saw you reading those financial textbooks when you were 12. I saw the light under your door at 3 in the morning when you were building that company. I knew it was only a matter of time before you dropped the hammer on this house. I just wanted to make sure I had clean underwear packed when you did." She walked past me toward the car, stopping to pat my cheek with a hand that felt like dry paper, but held the warmth of 1,000 suns. "You did good, child," she whispered. "You stood tall. I am proud of you." The knot in my chest, the one that had been tightening for 20 years, finally came loose. I felt a rush of air enter my lungs that tasted sweeter than any champagne. "Thank you, Grandma," I said, my voice thick with emotion. She looked at the Rolls-Royce and nodded approvingly at the chauffeur who was holding the door open for her. "Now that is a proper ride. Much better than that noisy thing Brad drives." She handed her bag to the driver and settled into the plush leather seat, sighing as she sank into the luxury. She looked out the window at the house one last time, her expression unreadable. "Are you going to miss it?" I asked, sliding in beside her. Hattie shook her head, turning her back on the chaos. "Not for 1 second. I am tired of this circus, Simone. The clowns are too loud and the popcorn is stale. Take me home." I nodded to the driver. "Home," I said. As the car glided away, the house shrank in the distance until it was just a speck of light in the darkness. I rested my head on Hattie's shoulder, listening to the hum of the engine and the steady beat of my own heart. For the first time in my life, I was not running away from something. I was moving forward. The war was over, and we had won. The air at 45 stories up was different. It was crisp and clean, detached from the grit and the noise of the streets below. I stood on the limestone terrace of my penthouse, leaning against the railing and looking out over the sprawling darkness of Central Park. To the north, the reservoir shimmered like a pool of black ink reflecting the city lights. To the south, the skyline rose up in a jagged wall of steel and glass, a testament to ambition and power. It was a view I had paid for with years of silence and strategy, and tonight it finally felt like it belonged to me. Behind me, I heard the soft clinking of china. Grandma Hattie was sitting on one of the plush outdoor sofas wrapped in a cashmere throw I had bought her. She looked small against the backdrop of the skyscrapers, but her spirit filled the space. She was sipping peppermint tea, looking around the terrace with a satisfied smile. She did not look impressed by the wealth. She looked relieved by the peace. "It is quiet up here," she observed, her voice barely rising above the wind. "You cannot hear the sirens. You cannot hear the neighbors fighting. You can just hear the city breathing." I turned from the railing and walked over to the low glass table where a bottle of vintage Bordeaux was breathing. "It is the only place I can think, Grandma." I poured a glass, the deep red liquid swirling against the crystal. The last 24 hours felt like a fever dream. The confrontation, the tears, the screaming matches in the house that was no longer ours. It all felt miles away now, trapped in a past I had just severed. I felt a lightness in my chest that was almost dizzying. For the first time in my life, I was not plotting. I was not waiting for the other shoe to drop. The shoe had dropped, and I was the one wearing it. My phone vibrated against the glass tabletop, a harsh mechanical buzz that intruded on the silence. The screen lit up with a notification. I glanced down. It was a message from Vivian. The preview text scrolled across the screen. "Simone, please pick up. I am sorry if I was harsh tonight, but you have to understand my position. We are at a Motel 6 near the highway. It is filthy. Please call me back. We need a deposit for a better room. We are family." I stared at the words. Even in her apology, she was asking for money. Even in her defeat, she was trying to manipulate me. She did not miss her daughter. She missed her ATM. I picked up the phone. Hattie watched me over the rim of her teacup, her eyes sharp and knowing. She did not say a word. She let me make the choice. I did not type a reply. I did not feel a surge of anger or a pang of guilt. I felt absolutely nothing. It was the indifference of a stranger reading a spam email. I opened the contact settings. I scrolled down to the bottom of the screen where the red text waited. Block caller. I pressed the button with my thumb. A confirmation box popped up asking if I was sure. I did not hesitate. I tapped yes. The message disappeared. The name disappeared. The connection was cut. I placed the phone face down on the table, essentially silencing the ghost of my mother forever. I picked up my wine glass and sat down next to Hattie. She reached out and patted my knee, a simple gesture of solidarity. "Is it done?" she asked softly. "It is done," I replied. I raised my glass toward the glittering skyline, toward the infinite possibilities of a future that finally belonged to me. Hattie raised her teacup, clinking it gently against the crystal. "To new beginnings, Grandma. To freedom, child," she corrected with a smile. We drank in the silence of the clouds as the city lights twinkled below us like a sea of stars, and the screen slowly faded to black. The most profound lesson from Simone's story is that true success is quiet, while failure is often loud. Brad and Monique spent their lives curating a desperate facade of wealth to hide their bankruptcy, proving that looking rich is vastly different from being rich. They underestimated Simone because she chose modesty over vanity, teaching us that we should never judge a person's capability by their appearance. More importantly, this story serves as a powerful reminder about the necessity of boundaries. Family ties are not a license for abuse. Simone's decision to evict her family and block her mother wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of radical self-preservation. It teaches us that you cannot save people who are determined to drag you down, and sometimes the only way to heal is to cut the cord. Simone proved that your mental peace and financial security are worth more than the approval of toxic people. Success is the best revenge, but silence is the ultimate closure. What would you have done in Simone's shoes? Would you have given your family a second chance or walked away forever? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more satisfying stories of justice served.